think about, well, let's actually just go straight into our question. So what I want to do is I want you to think about, this is a set of data, and each of these things is given in, basically they say, if intervals of 250,000 kilometers are used, in which interval will most of the islands fall? Which one do you think it is? Or if there's a tool or strategy that you think could be useful in answering this, why don't you let us know about that too? So what would make this question, if we had it, easier? But for now, I'm just interested in your answer, really. So as we look at this question, we know it's about the size of islands. So these are different islands in the world, and they've given us an area in kilometers for each island. And then they've said, if intervals of 250,000 kilometers are used, which interval will most of the islands fall? So that's the question. Now, part of what makes this question difficult is it's not easy to see what's going on with the data. It's all a bit mixed up. And when they use these intervals, what they're really asking you to do is to group the data. And so what I'm going to suggest is, why don't we make a group data table? And so what a group data table has is it has intervals, and then it also has a tally chart. And then it normally has frequency. Sorry, my handwriting is a bit small today. So if we look at the intervals they've given us, I think it goes 0 to 250. It goes 250 to 500, 500 to 750, 750 to 1,000,000, or it's, in this case, it's 1,000,000. And then it has an interval for 2,000 to 2,250. Can I zoom in a little bit? How about that? No. So far, Tony is the only person I can see in the chat who's answered. What I was thinking, what might make it easier is if you have what's called a group data table, you can go through each item and just tick it off. So 2175, that would be in this interval down here. So what we normally do is we just have like a one line. 289, 900, that's going to be one tally in this column. So I've done this one. 251 would be another tally in this one. And this could help tell you which interval will most of the islands fall into. That's what I would do, just to get some organization. And see what you guys get then. So we've done this one. 587, where would that fall? There. So what I've done is I've taken this data and I've changed it into a group data like interval table. And so if I look at my tally chart, I should have 5 islands that fall between 0 and 250,000 kilometers squared. And so the frequency column will have 5 there, 1 here, 2 here, 2 here, and 1 here. And so again, I want you to, once you have this table, I want you to ask yourself which of the 5 options, A, B, C, D, or E, will most of the islands fall into. Okay, so Loretta is given an option. Who else has an idea about which interval will most of the islands fall? Yeah. So I think once you have a table which has a frequency count, it's much easier to see what is kind of going on. And so what this question is really asking for, today the focus in our lesson is shifting to what we call grouped data. So we're grouping the data into intervals, and we're learning to work out statistics for groups of data. Now, this first question is asking you about what is the modal interval. Modal interval. And the modal interval is simply the interval that has the most items in it. And so once you have a grouped data table like this, it's easy to see that basically the 0 to 250 interval works. So that's why it's really good to do a simple example to start with. How is the internet okay, Lebo? Is my internet okay, or is it hanging?
I thought it was mine, Mr. S. Yeah, but there was a bit of
okay. Let me switch networks. It should be better then.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So now, what I want to ask you about is, we've asked about the modal interval. I now want to find the median interval, right? The median interval. Now you'll notice that when I deal with group data, a lot of the time we're asking for the interval, not the actual item. So it's the median interval, the modal interval, because we're dealing with intervals of data. Who would like to give me a suggestion as to how I would go about finding the median normally? What would I normally do when I'm trying to find the median? Who has some suggestions or ideas about how I would find the median normally? What's step 1? Find the position. Perfect. So normally when we find the median, we find the position, and we call it Q2. Now, normally then we use the formula 1/2 times n plus 1. Now, what is a quick way to find out how many data items we have? It's just take the total of the frequency column. So if we think about this, we've got 5 items in this interval, 6, 8, 10, 11. There are 11 items in my data set. So when I ask what n is going to be 11. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to first find me the position of the median, and then we'll ask about what the median interval is. So what is the position going to be? Okay, it's going to be the 6th position. Yeah. So if it's the 6th position, let's think about going from smallest to biggest. And it might be helpful to have what's called a cumulative frequency column here. I'm not sure if all of you would find helpful, but it might be. So if you think about the first interval, 0 to 250, there's 5. Now, which interval is going to contain the 6th position? Well, if we had a cumulative frequency column on the end here, we could go 5, then 6, 8, 10, 11. we can clearly see, well, maybe let me ask you that, which interval has the 6th position in it? I want you to put that in the chat. So if you look at what I was trying to say is that basically the median interval in this case is going to be 250 to 500,000 because it contains the 6th position. Okay. Now I can't see the chat too well. Let's have a look. Are there any questions or comments on that? Otherwise, we're going to move on. Okay, let's move on now. Now, actually, before I move on completely, what is the other measure of central tendency that I haven't covered yet? So there's always been a mode and a median. What is the third measure that I haven't dealt with here? The mean. Okay. And so when we talk about grouped data, we will talk about finding something called the estimated mean. And so that we will come to later in the lesson, but I just want to first practice this new skill that we were learning here. So here is another data table. And instead of having to arrange it, I've been a nice math teacher and you are given the frequency. I want you to state for me, what is the modal interval of this data set? What is the modal interval? Don't worry, Shane. I also have load shedding at the moment. It's a bit of a crazy week, but the show must go on. And so just take a moment to even read through the data, guys. What is the question talking about? And then once you've done that, can you identify the modal interval? Okay, so I see Kevin has given us an answer. Who else has given us an answer? Yeah. So the good thing is when we deal with data that's been grouped and they ask you for the modal interval, it's as long as you have a frequency column, it's pretty straightforward to get. What you're going to find is that's the one with the biggest frequency number. And so the modal interval will just be 40 to 50. Now, if we look at this question, let's just take a moment to make sure we understand what's going on. The total frequency count is 40. A choir teacher kept a record of the number of learners who attended the 40 choir practices during the year. The frequency table gives a summary of the attendance. So what the table is telling you is that there was one practice during the year where between 0 and 10 students came to the practice. Maybe it was a day where there was lots of rain and people couldn't come, or there was something exciting going on. Between 10 and 20 students came, or there were 2 occasions during the year where between 10 and 20 students came to a choir practice. In the modal interval, so most of the time, or the most common occurrence for a choir practice was for between 40 and 50 people to come to the practice. Okay, so just so we make some sense of what the question is about. The next thing I want you to calculate is I want you to calculate for me the median interval. So I want you to think back to what we did in the previous question and find me the median interval. And know that the data is already arranged from smallest to biggest. And so all you need to think about is the position. And then once you know the position, which column or which row corresponds to that position. So just take a moment to do that now. So step 1 is to find a position. Step 2 is to find out which interval that position is in line with. So I see two answers that have come through so far. Now, for the position of the median, we always went a half times n plus 1. Luckily, we are given n is 40. And so the position should be 20.5. So we have to count from the beginning and find which interval has in it position 20.5. Yeah, so Loretta, the fact that it's 20.5 doesn't really matter. It's more about which interval does this fall into. So I know that there's one item in the first one. If I add 2 more, I've got up to 3. Now remember, I'm trying to get to position 20.5. If I add 11 to that, I'm going to get, we've got 3, so it's 14. So I'm still not there. And when I add 9 to 14, it feels like I finally get to an interval that will contain this position. So I could count it up in the frequency column, or the other way of doing it is just to have a cumulative frequency column where I count the frequencies, and then I would get 14, and then you'll see straight away when you get up to 23. So at the end of this interval between 30 and 40, I'm at 23, and I only needed to count up to 20.5. And so that's why we should find that the median interval for this scenario is going to be between 30 and 40, because that interval contains the position 20.5. So I think there might be some questions because there is a variety of comments. What I'd like to know is, yeah, maybe you could raise your hand for a question or type a question in the chats. I want to make sure that you've understood how I've counted up to 20.5. Maybe just do a quick little thought check. Thumbs up if you get what I've done. Thumbs down if you feel a bit like, oh, this man is speaking of things which I do not know. So what did I do? I found the position like normal, and then I counted through the frequency columns. And I said, well, I want to count up to 20.5. Which interval has 20.5? So 1 plus 2 is 3, 11 is 14. And then if I get to the end of this interval, I've gone too far. I've got to 23. So it must be contained in this interval over here. Okay, so it's a bit of a mixture. So what I want to say to those who aren't quite there yet, we're going to do another example shortly. Okay, but the main idea I want you to focus on is in the position calculation. So see how we said, why can't we use 20 to 30? Because see how the interval 20 to 30 does not contain the item with position 20.5. So if you look at the cumulative frequency total, at the end of 20 to 30, I'm all the way up to 14. CF is cumulative frequency, yes. Now, if I'm only at the 14th position by the end of the interval 20 to 30, I clearly haven't got to the position 20.5. So I need to keep on counting to the next interval. Now, by the next interval, when it's finished, I've got to the 23rd position. So clearly, somewhere in this interval, I got to the 20.5th position. You'll see it if I do this. We do another example after this. So don't worry, we will be able to do it. But for now, I just want you to kind of take it in, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, there's one more calculation that we need to learn to do. So the correct answer for this question is the median interval was 30 to 40. So I'll just put that as my answer. However, we still need to know how to find the mean for a grouped data set. And I want to ask you, what is the problem with finding the mean in this particular question? Why can't I just find the mean the normal way like I used to? Why am I going to say for a grouped data table, I have to find the estimated mean? Does anybody have an idea they want to share in the chat, or maybe put their hand up? What do you think? So Nalotando has said, you don't have the individual numbers. You're quite right, Nalotando, you don't. So I don't know, is the number in the first interval 5? Is it 7? Is it 9? So what do we do to get around that? Who knows what we do to get around the fact that we don't have individual numbers? Any ideas? Find the midpoint. Yes. So what we do is we find the midpoint of these intervals. So what is going to be the midpoint of the first interval? Yeah, it's 5, because we just basically add 0 and 10 and divide by 2. So that's going to be 5. What's the midpoint of the second interval? Yeah, 15. And if you follow that same pattern, it's going to be, the next one is 25, then it's 35, 45, and then 55. So what happens is, because we don't know the exact values, we just use the midpoint of the interval to act like the exact values. Okay, so this is why it's called the estimated mean, because we have to estimate the value using the midpoint. Now, what was the formula for the mean? Well, it was the number of items, and then it was the sum of all the items. So I want to know, what is the number of items in this data set? What is the number of items in this data set? So the total data set, so not just one interval. What is the total? Well, if you look at the total of the frequency column, it's 40. So the total number of items in this data set is going to be 40. And so we divide by 40. Okay, but now what about the top line? We need to think about, how do we add up all these items? Because we've got one item in the first one, but we've got 2 items in the second interval. And the way we deal with this is, all we do is we take our midpoint value, so which is like the standard value, and we times it by the frequency. So we go 5 times 1. That's the first part. Then we go plus, we say, what's the next point? We go 15. And how many times did we have data in that interval? We had it twice. So we go 15 times 2. Plus, what's the next interval? It's going to be 25. And how many times did we have 25? We had 11 times. So we go times by 11. Now, what I want is, I want you guys to I want you to complete this question, and I want you to find me the estimated mean. What is the estimated mean for this question? Now, I'm not finished. Remember, I've only done the first 3 intervals. So I did those 3. I want you to finish it off and get me a final answer for the estimated mean. So you do need to get a total for the top column. And then once you've got that, you're going to divide it by 40. So what are you going to get for the final answer here? I'm going to use my answer cheat sheet here just to make sure I get the number right. So the total should be, yeah. The final answer, I'm seeing it in the chat fairly consistently, the final answer should be 35.5. Let's have one more check of my answers if they're here. 1420 divided by 40 here. So if you go the top total is 1420, the bottom is 40, and you should get 35.5. And that is called your estimated mean. And that's a very common exam question. Guys, can you just give me a thumbs up if you know how to do the estimated mean? Give me a thumbs down if you're feeling a bit lost with that estimated mean. Okay, awesome. Well, then we've done well for the first part of the lesson. So let us all stand to our feet. And if you could please turn your cameras on and just show us you stretching. I'm going to stretch, Lebo's going to stretch. And if you could just stretch it out and just say thank you to your body. So to the students who are still struggling with these types of questions, we're going to do another set of these on the flip side of the break. And so you don't need to worry. We'll go through the same process again.
I think our students are camera shy today.
You can shine brightly, guys, because in Cape Town, we don't have much electricity, so you can. All right,
Come on, guys.
Stretch it out, roll those
body.
shoulders. Yeah. Oh, I feel so much better. I do hope that you had a good stretch there. Okay, so what I want to do now is I just want to have a little brain break. So let's go to that. So this many people from this many countries, this many countries have visited the space station. Can you work it out from this drawing here? Over to you guys. So see how I think I agree with you that the USA is 3. And what else do we have to do? Oratile is just throwing the answer straight in there. Let's see if you agree. Do you agree with Oratile on the answer there? You guys are all over this. So I agree Russia is 2 and 2 because that gives you 12, which Japan must then be 12. And if Japan is 12 and you have 2 US flags, then the answer should be 18. So it turns out 18 countries have visited the space station. Woohoo! I did not know that. And I think South Africa is one of them.
We learn something new every day.
Yeah, we do. Okay, so as we go into the second part of this lesson, I want to make sure that everybody has at least had a little bit of a stretch because we're going to practice the same stuff again. We're going to look for the modal interval. We're going to look for the median interval, and we're going to look for the estimated mean. These are the 3 measures of central tendency that we look for when we have grouped data. The modal interval was quite easy. The tricky thing for the median interval was to calculate its position and to count to the correct interval that corresponded to that position. Then the tricky thing with the estimated median was basically finding the midpoints and then doing that long top part of the calculation in order to get the estimated mean. But that's our goal for today. If we get that, then we can pat ourselves on the back. So let's go to a different question. Go down to this one. Okay, so in a particular primary school in Pietermaritzburg, it was found that 90 of the foundation phase learners, grade 1, 2, 3, were accompanied to school by someone. The ages of the person accompanying the child were recorded, as shown in the table below. So they're not giving you exact ages. They're not giving you lists of data. They're giving you frequency counts of an interval. So the first interval says there were 12 people in the 0 to 10 age range who were accompanying these foundation learners. Then the second interval says there were 30 people who were between the age of 10 and 20 who were accompanying these learners. Now, what I want to ask before we even go to question A is how many learners in total, or how many these are people who are accompanying learners. How many people in total, or how many data items do we have in total here? So let's just start with that question. They've given us a frequency column, but I want to know what is the total number of data items in this data set? Yes. Okay, so it's always nice to know what n is. In this case, n is 90. You could do it by adding up the frequency column. So that would be one way of doing it. Or you could have noticed that they actually told you in the question. Okay, so step one. We know what n is. N is 90. Now, I want you to tell me which is the modal interval. Find me the modal interval for this particular data set, which is grouped into intervals. Yeah, well, that was the modal interval is marks for jam. The modal interval is the one with the highest frequency count. And so the answer will be 10 to 20. Awesome. Now I want you to find me the estimated mean age of the person accompanying a learner from school. So now that we're trying to work out the mean age, the average age, and we need to add a particular column. What column do we need to add in order to help us make the journey a little bit easier? Tell me in the chat, what column do I need to add to help me find or estimate the mean? Okay, it's not going to be the cumulative frequency. It's going to be the midpoint. So we need to know what the midpoint is. And once we know what the midpoint is, we can then work out our estimated mean. So just to get you started, I think the midpoint of the first interval is going to be 5. And then the midpoint of the second one is going to be 15. See if you can calculate the estimated mean using that idea that I showed you before and part of what I've done now. However, I know some students felt unsure about this. And so I'd love to get a question from you in the chat or for you to raise your hand and we can have a chat. For those who are feeling good, you can go ahead and do it. Lisa has asked, how do I find the midpoint? In this case, Lisa, all I do is I take the two endpoints, I add them together and I divide by 2. So I'm just going 10 plus 20 divided by 2. Yeah. And so in that case, it's going to be 15. In the first one, I went 0 plus 10 divided by 2, and that gave me 5. Does that help, Lisa? Just going to make this a bit bigger. So are there 2 ways to solve this? So Kevin, there is a way that you can use your calculator to do this, but I think it's not a bad idea to understand how this works because there are some higher level questions that require you to work out like missing items in the data table. And so I will show you possibly in the next lesson how to do it on your calculator, but for now, I prefer you to be able to do it manually. Okay, so what is the calculation going to look like? We know that the bottom is going to have divide by 90 because there's 90 items in total. The difficult part is this top part, and that's what I want you to keep going with. I'll wait and see for those answers to start coming before I do anything more. So a couple of answers are coming through. Keep them coming. So I would start by going, let's go with 5 times 12. That would be my first, because I'm going to, this 5 is the value that I'm using, and I'm going 5 times 12. Well, I can even look at the columns, and let's go 5 times 12. Then I'm going to go 15 times by 30. So I've done this one and this one. Then I should get that I'm going to have plus 25 times 18. Now, this is going to have to carry on going. And so I'm going to use the answers to help me here, but you should get something on the top divided by 90, and I will confirm what that is in a second. Let me go and find the answer total. In fact, let me even bring this table up so you guys can all see it. So you should get 2,310 is the total that you get if you get this correctly. So 2,310. And if you get that, you should then get, let me turn on my, let me turn on my lights, my extra lights. So I can see my calculator. 2,310 divided by 90. You should get 25.67 is the correct answer. Yeah. And so that's how you calculate the estimated mean. Are there...
Good job, guys.
Yeah. It's a bit trickier. The key to it is 15 times 30, 25 times 18, and I'm adding up all those things. Okay. Let's do another little check, because I know some people found this difficult before the break. Thumbs up if you feel good about estimated mean. Thumbs down if you still feel a bit rubbish about it. And then while we're doing that vote, I want you guys to try and find the median or in this case, it says median age, but I'm going to ask you for the median interval. What is the median interval for this data set? Okay. We'll try and squeeze in one more, Kevin, before the end of the lesson. So by the end, you should be hundreds. Okay. What is the median age for this data set? And remember, with the median age, we had to do a slightly different calculation. We had to think about the position, and then we had to find the interval that corresponded to the position we were looking for. Get rid of this. So I'm going to rub out the midpoint column because I don't think we need that right now. And we need the position of the median, which is a half times n plus 1. Now, you said to me earlier on that there was 90. So the position is going to be 45.5. Now, that's not a real position per se, but we're trying to find the interval that contains the 45th position. And so we might have to do some counting. I think it's easier to just have a cumulative frequency column that you add on to keep track of how far you are. So the first, basically I've got 12 items in the first interval. If I then go to the second interval, if I include the 30 that occur in the second, I've got up to the 42nd interval. Now, or 42nd position. Now, 42 is not the position that I want. I'm interested in the interval that contains the 45th position. So how far have I got if I go to the next interval? Well, I got 42 so far. I add 18. Now I'm up to 60. Now, since I'm up to 60, I must have gone past the thing that's in the 45th position. And so I know what interval is going to be the median interval here. There's no use going any further because I know it must have occurred between, basically between 20 and 30. So Boitemelo is asking, how do I find the cumulative frequency? So all I do, Boitemelo, is I go to the frequency column. So the first cumulative frequency interval is always going to be the same as the frequency. And then for the next cumulative frequency, I accumulate it. So I add whatever the frequency column is here. So 12 plus 30 is then going to give me 42. And then to get the next one, I say, what's 42 plus whatever's the next interval is 18. And I'm basically saying up to that point, between 0 and 30, I've had 60 items of data. Yeah, so Keenan said, just add the frequencies. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I hope this is getting a little bit easier each time we do it. It's just this idea that the data is no longer presented in a lovely list, but rather it's given to you in a table. And so you need to learn some of these words and kind of work with that. Let's do one more. Oh, sorry, these are all answers already. Let me go to. Okay, so this, I think we're going to do the last one of today. So this is what I'm not going to ask you to organize the data, but I'll show you what a question could look like where you organize the data. So here they give you a data set and it's all unarranged. And so what you could have to do, although I don't see it often because it takes too long for students in exams, they can do it in tests, is you may have to do a tally column where you go through the data and you basically kind of mark it off and see which ones are in which areas. But I'm giving you, to start with, the frequency column and the number of, the data. So let's understand the question. A certain school provides buses to transport the learners to and from a nearby village. A record is kept of the number of learners on each bus trip for 26 school days. So what the data table is telling us, it's saying on 3 of those 26 days, there were 24 students on the bus. On 4 of those days, there were 25 students on the bus. So that's just the storytelling part. We know that the frequency column must add to 26 because they told us this is only keeping record of 26 school days. So what you'll notice here is that this is data in a table, but this is discrete data. It's no longer, it's basically they're giving you exact items. And so you might have to work a little bit different, not too much differently, but a little bit differently. So here in this case, because you have the exact items, you can calculate the mean number of learners per trip. So I want you to try and calculate the mean number of learners. You don't actually have to use the midpoint because they've given you the items. So go ahead and find me the mean.
Mr. S?
Yeah.
While they do that, is it possible to please go to the previous question so Nizal can take a screenshot?
I can. Then Nizal, we can go there. Just take a screenshot quickly and I'll go back. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Thanks, Mr. S.
Pleasure. So what do we get for the mean in this particular question? So this isn't an estimated mean. This is just a mean from a data set that's given in a table. It's grouped, but it's grouped into exact numbers. So but the same ideas will apply. So we know it's going to be divided by 26. So what is the mean going to be? So it should start off a bit like this. And then we keep going like that. Let's see the different answers that are coming up. So remember, if you get a total on the top, you still have to divide it by 26 at the bottom. Okay, a couple of different answers going on. So let's just make sure, let's everybody put their answer in for what they get, because I want to give you the right answer and we can see where we went wrong if we did. So we should have got the total. The total should have been correctly. We should have had 711 divided by 26. If I put that into my calculator, 711 divided by 27.345. So in this scenario, that would be that it wouldn't be an estimated mean, it would be an exact mean, because they gave you not an interval, they gave you exact values in the table. Okay. Now, I am seeing, I think for those who made a mistake, they probably just made an adding error with the 711. So can you please find for me next, I want you to find the mode and hopefully that long. But let's just see it first. What is the mode? Piece of cake, right? The mode is just, so it's going to be 20. To me, the median. Find me the median for this particular data set. Find me the median for this data set. Think about what techniques we've used so far in the lesson, and then we'll go from there. So normally with the median, you have to find the position. So think about that first, and we'll go from there. So if I want to find the position of the median, I'm just going to use my good old faithful formula, which is a half times n plus 1. In this case, n is 26, so its position 27, so that's 13 and a half. Make sure I'm doing that right. Okay, so now I need to count, and there's different with my brain. So 3, 7, 9, 13, and then I go up to the next one is up to 19. Now, the thing is, 30 and a half, at the end of the, basically, it's going to be 28. Okay, it's going to be 28 because if you watch this, let me zoom in as well because it's hard to see otherwise. If you look at my count, I know I need the thing in the 13 and a half position. So I've only got up to 3 with that interval. Now I've got up to 7. Now I've gone up to 9. Now I've gone up to 13. Remember, I need to get to the interval or the grouping. In this case, it's not even an interval, it's just a group. That is the 13 and a half position. And so I have to go one step further because by the end of this interval, I only got to 13. I had to get to 13 and a half, which means that the median is also going to be 28 in this data set. Okay. So questions, comments? So even if it's 13.1, it's 28. Yes, Kevin. So it would never be with a median. It would. I'm trying to think if it would ever be like that. But yeah, it's always going to be it's gone over into the next interval, and so it has to be in the next interval or the next group. Yes. So the answer is yes to your question, Kevin. Okay, so let's just do a little bit of reflecting. For today, what did we learn about? So we learned about finding the modal interval or the modal group is very straightforward. It's just the one that occurs the most often. We learned that sometimes we have to take some time to read through the question to understand it. Then we spoke about what's called the estimated mean. When we find the estimated mean, we have to use the midpoint of the interval. If we find the exact mean, showing you now where on the bottom you have the number of items, on the top you have the group value times the frequency. And then for the median interval or the median in a group, you find its position and then you find the place in the list which corresponds to that position. Okay. And we will continue in the next lesson. So this was our very first lesson on group data. We're going to keep building our understanding as we go forward for the next 3 lessons. And we'll start to look at also how do we take group data and represent it graphically. Okay, so Lebo, if you could please put the poll out to the students. Guys, it's been great teaching you. I hope that you are load shedding free